Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to untangle the incredibly wild history, the massive global obscenity trials, and the unexpectedly deep philosophy behind what is arguably literature's most infamous novel. For decades, D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover was pretty much synonymous with pure scandal. But today, we're going right back to the source material to uncover what this deeply controversial masterpiece was actually trying to say. Okay, let's just dive right into this absolutely outrageous, wildly out-of-touch question asked during the landmark 1960 UK obscenity trial. I mean, this single quote perfectly sets the historical stage for us. The chief prosecutor, Mervyn Griffith-Jones, confidently stands up and poses this question to the jury, completely and totally unaware of how rapidly society was changing right under his nose. He really thought he was defending public morality, but honestly, he just ended up exposing exactly how deep the class divides and patriarchal attitudes of that era really ran. 3 million. Think about that for a second. That is the staggering number of uncensored copies that went absolutely flying off the shelves in the UK immediately after the publisher, Penguin Books, was acquitted. It wasn't just a bestseller, it was an absolute publishing phenomenon. People were so incredibly hungry for this book, and the government's attempt to suppress it, well, that just poured gasoline right on the fire. But here's the thing that always gets lost in all that sensationalism. We're going to explore how this heavily banned book was actually a despaired philosophical plea for human connection, rather than just simple smut. Lawrence looked around and saw a world that was emotionally and physically dying. And this novel, this was his highly controversial prescription for a cure. To really grasp that, we need to step back into the grim reality of 1920s England to understand the absolute void that birthed this story. Section 1. A post-war void. The death of the old world. So this bleak setting establishes a deeply divided, traumatized world. Following the sheer devastation of World War I, an entire generation was just shattered. Nature itself was being swallowed whole by industrial machinery, which we see represented by the squalid, dirty coal mining village of Tevershall. And then right next door, you have Ragwe Hall, this cold, incredibly isolated aristocratic estate. The setting itself perfectly represents a society where the vital spark of life has basically been choked out by both massive trauma and mechanized greed. The really crucial point here is Lawrence's stark dichotomy between the two main men in Constance Chatterley's life. First, there is her husband, Sir Clifford. He returns from the war paralyzed from the waist down, and he really symbolizes the dead intellect, the sterile aristocracy, and this cold obsession with industrial success. Then, on the flip side, we have Oliver Mellors, the gamekeeper. He's a working-class outsider who retreats into the forest. He represents raw, living nature, the physical body, and true vitality. They are complete opposites, pulling Connie in two totally different directions. Lawrence genuinely felt that modern life brought this devastating sense of alienation. This is beautifully summarized right in the novel's opening lines, talking about surviving the aftermath of the Great War. People were essentially just trying to exist after the sky had literally fallen on their world, just trying to scramble over the ruins of a completely broken society. And how exactly did the elite class deal with this tragedy? Well, they were treated into what Lawrence calls the life of the mind. To Sir Clifford and his elite circle, humans were merely minds. They just sit around endlessly debating abstract politics and sociology while completely dismissing physical love or any real bodily connection. And this led to an emotionally hollow, almost bloodless existence that deeply, deeply alienated Clifford's young, vibrant wife, Constance. Section 2. The Sensual Awakening, Reuniting Mind and Body. You see, when most people hear Lady Chatterley, they immediately just think of the scandalous bedroom scenes. But beyond the bedroom, Lawrence was actively, aggressively critiquing rigid class boundaries. He was lamenting the loss of tradition and nature to these dirty coal mines. And, quite radically for the time I might add, he was championing honest, fully realized female sexual desire. He really wanted to show that true human integrity requires a balance of all these things. And Lawrence's true morally serious intent is crystal clear right here. In an essay he wrote defending the novel, he flat out stated that he despised pornography. He actually saw porn as an insult to the human spirit. Instead, his goal was to desperately harmonize the conscious mind with the natural body. He wanted society to stop being so incredibly ashamed of physical reality. Which brings us to Connie Chatterley's journey, which unfolds in 3 distinct steps. Her arc isn't just a trashy affair, it's a real evolution. First, she suffers in total isolation. Second, She attempts an affair with an intellectual playwright named Mellors, but she finds it completely empty and selfish. It is only in the third step, with the gamekeeper Mellors, that she finally finds a profound sensual and emotional reunion. It's this step-by-step realization that true vitality means crossing strict class lines and finally embracing tender bodily reality. Now, it is absolutely vital to note exactly why the book was banned so aggressively. Lawrence deliberately used explicit four-letter words. And he wasn't doing this just to be crude or edgy. It was actually an academic literary tool meant to ground the reader in raw physical reality. He literally wanted to shock the polite upper-class reader right out of their sterile mindset and force them to confront the physical body without that shudder of shame. Though, as you can probably guess, the authorities certainly didn't see it that way.
Section 3. The Global Obscenity Trials. A War on Words.
It took over 30 years. 30 years of underground piracy, heavily censored versions, and intensely bitter legal battles for the complete text to finally reach the general public legally. Just imagine writing a book with the intent to heal a broken society, only to have it driven completely underground for 3 decades. The real turning point in the UK was this specific act passed in 1959. This new law essentially allowed publishers to escape obscenity convictions, but only if they could prove a controversial work possessed true literary merit. This was a massive game changer. It meant Penguin Books could bring in prominent academics, authors, and critics to testify under oath to the book's deep social value. And who was actually going to decide its fate? Ultimately, it took a jury of 12 everyday citizens, 9 men and 3 women, to weigh all that expert testimony against the sheer moral outrage of the prosecutors. And they did it. They returned a not guilty verdict, saving Penguin Books and dealing an absolutely fatal blow to old-world censorship in Britain. However, the fight absolutely continued globally. Countries like India applied a much older, stricter legal standard called the Hicklin test. In 1964, the Supreme Court of India ruled that the book's explicit portions actually outweighed its social gains. This effectively upheld the ban and proved that global community standards were still wildly different. In fact, the pushback was everywhere, whether it was Japanese translators facing massive fines in the 1950s, or Australian activists literally smuggling copies across the border like contraband just to challenge the censors. The sheer scale of these global bans proved one very important thing: just how deeply Lawrence's ideas threatened the established order everywhere. Section 4. A Legacy of Liberation. More than a scandal. Ultimately, Lady Chatterley left a legacy far more profound than just a bunch of dramatic courtroom showdowns. By breaking down those rigid legal walls, the novel fundamentally reshaped global free speech. It established the redeeming social value defense for literature in the US, it forced the easing of censorship in places like Canada and Australia, and it completely set the stage for the 1960s sexual revolution. It quite literally paved the way for modern artistic expression across all forms of media. The cultural shockwave was so massive that it was even immortalized in poetry. The poet Philip Larkin humorously linked the end of the Chatterley trial to the birth of modern pop culture and the Beatles. The book's acquittal basically became this huge cultural dividing line between the stuffy, repressed old world and the vibrant, modern new one. Which leaves us here today, knowing what we know now about Lawrence's intense fear of a dehumanized, mechanized society, a society that lives entirely inside its own head and ignores the natural world. I want to leave you with this to ponder about our own modern lives. As we sit here staring into our smartphones, living in this hyper-digital, screen-obsessed era, are we once again falling back into that sterile life of the mind? Have we actually achieved that vital balance between mind and body? Or are we just making the exact same mistakes Sir Clifford made a century ago? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this changes how you view this infamous classic. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.